So, Mission Impossible is a film franchise that started in 1996, and all of them have starred Tom Cruise in the main role, obviously. And this movie that's come out this last week has been the seventh entry. Now, as I say, this is a franchise that's nearly 30 years old. It's quite good that these movies have been staggered quite a few years apart, because it'd be really easy to burn out with a franchise like this if you compare it to something like The Fast and Furious. As much as I kind of like those films for what they are, fatigue does seem to be setting in at least a couple of movies back at least. But with Mission Impossible, I don't feel that way. Now, this isn't my favourite film franchise. To be honest, I wish I actually liked these movies more than I actually do. I do quite enjoy them, I just don't love them. This new entry, however, I was really happy with, so I'm going to talk about that here today. I did go to the cinema to see this, but I didn't get to see it in IMAX, unfortunately. I think it would probably benefit from that, but we'll see anyway. So, as I say, the film is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I believe Part 2 will be coming out at some point in the near future because these two are back to back. So, let's talk about that today. So apologies, as you can see, I'm not in my usual setting. I'm around at my father's house, hence all the Western movies here. It's the nearest thing that I could find that's similar to my normal background in the video room. But anyway, point is, so this film is the seventh in the series, and it's not really a film series that I've loved, if you know what I mean. I've liked it. I want to like these films more than I have done in the past. But some of them, to me, I just kind of found them a bit average and kind of forgettable. But that's just me. That's my issue that I need to overcome, because these are very good films, and this one I think is one of the best. Now, this is a non-spoiler review, so it's a new plot, it's a new villain. Doesn't rely too much on what's gone before. You can kind of come into this movie having not seen the others and pretty much pick it up. I mean, obviously there's returning characters and so on, but you kind of get the impression just watching it that these people have known each other for a long time and have worked together in various other missions, so you don't necessarily need to actually know what those are. Obviously it helps if you've seen the other ones, and do watch them if you haven't, because they are quite good. But for this one, it's probably the closest to being like a Bond film than any of the others, I would say. Maybe the first one was quite close to being like a James Bond film. Obviously, Mission Impossible as a franchise with a TV series, that was from the spy-fi genre of the 60s, which kind of came out of off the back of the success of the James Bond films, amongst other things, but James Bond was like the big influence. And you can see that in this one, there's quite a lot of nods in this, I thought, to some of the James Bond films, I suspect intentionally so. There's some bits, for example, where, not getting too heavy into spoilers, but there's a bit where the two characters, the Tom Cruise and Hayley Atwell characters, are handcuffed to each other whilst escaping from the bad guys, driving a vehicle, very similar to Tomorrow Never Dies, where you had Pierce Brosnan and Michelle Yeoh handcuffed to each other while riding a motorbike. But at one point, the vehicle they're driving is it's not a Mini, it's a Fiat. But it was very similar to in For Your Eyes Only, when James Bond was it a Citroen or something? Or I can't remember now. Yeah, it was a Citroen, I think I seem to remember, not a Mini. From For Your Eyes Only from 1981 with Roger Moore, where they're kind of being outdriven by these big, heavy, bulky cars. He's in this really small yellow car, very similar to that. There's a few other things as well, obviously, being on top of a train in this, very similar to Octopussy. I realised some of the previous Mission Impossible films had kind of done that as well, the first one, but this was more similar to Octopussy. The actual train that they're on is very similar to what we had in From Russia with Love, and there's a bit where the bad guy escapes onto a yellow pickup truck, which is very similar to what was Red Grant's plan to escape on I seem to remember it being a yellow pickup truck from Russia with Love. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that, but it was very reminiscent of that. Obviously, the stunt that we've seen in the trailer where he goes off a motorbike off the edge of a cliff and then jumps off and the parachute opens, very similar to The Spy Who Loved Me. The film opens with an attack on a submarine, very similar to the beginning of The Spy Who Loved Me. Just all sorts of little nods to the James Bond franchise. There's probably more. I seem to remember there being a few others as well that I was kind of remembering throughout this film, but it did seem like there were a lot of things thrown in there from that. But the cast of actors in this is very good as well. Most of them are returning characters, but there's some new ones as well. If you can hear a weird noise, by the way, I've got a Staffordshire Bull Terrier down here that's kind of making a bit of a weird noise. That's not me making that. Shut up, you. So beyond that, like I say, without getting too heavily into spoilers, that's not what I'm wanting to do here. The MacGuffin of the film, if you want to call it that, the thing that drives the plot along, is this this key that is a key to some kind of weapon. Or well, not a weapon, but I'm just going to say that because it's non-spoilers. But it's a key to a big thing, basically, that's very serious. Probably the most serious thing that they've dealt with in any of the movies. Obviously, you have to up the ante from sequel to sequel, but this one is very much Earth world changing, and it's quite clever how it's done. Anyway, it's not just a typical thing like it's a key, to a nuclear bomb or something, but the nature of the key itself and also the thing that it activates or deactivates is quite clever how that's worked. Even the beginning of the film, with, like I say, I'm not going to be too specific, but there's an attack on a submarine, like I say, and even the nature of how that's handled is very different to anything that that you would expect anyway. So try to think what else I can say really without getting too heavily into spoilers. It's definitely another good Tom Cruise one off the back of Top Gun Maverick last year. It feels good to still have him being Tom Cruise, the same guy that he was, over the last couple of decades, especially. I know he's an older man now, but it's good to just have him in this and doesn't feel like he's tiring out or anything, because you often get that with a lot of actors as they get older. You can sort of tell and think, maybe it's time to start calling it a day because it's getting a bit embarrassing now. There wasn't really much in terms of like romance or anything like that, because I can get a bit cringy. Even for Tom Cruise at his age, he's very good, but it does get a bit cringy if they're kind of trying to get like sort of a romance thing going on in the story. It was more friends based, like the connections that he's got with his friends, kind of like you have with films like Fast and Furious and so on. Where they're practically family. I don't know if they've ever used that analogy in the Fast and Furious movies before. Obviously, I'm kidding. But that does kind of play here as well. It's a big part of it. So obviously there's a dynamic there with some of the new characters, like I say, from Hayley Atwell being introduced to the this franchise in this movie. She's quite heavily involved with this. She's at the kind of forefront of the story, and she kind of now feels like part of the family, basically. And obviously this is a part one, so that's another issue that I was going to mention. It was handled quite well, because it's annoying when you go to see a film and you feel like you're only getting half a film. There are many where they've done that, and I think it's worked out okay. I think there was one of the Hunger Games films ended quite abruptly, and you felt kind of robbed because it felt like you'd basically bought half of a film with that cinema ticket. And Avengers Infinity War, I thought was quite good, where obviously it felt like a complete film. And when you watch that and Endgame together now, it doesn't feel like all one film. It does feel like two separate things. This, I think, will work in a similar sense. It does feel like a complete film, but it is to be continued. Obviously, the other films have a sense of continuity through those movies as well. This one has a very fundamental sense of continuity, because it's a part one and a part two, but it's not half a film, I don't think, anyway. When it ended, it didn't wrap up. It was clearly to be continued, but there was a conclusion at the end of it to a degree. And where they go with it next is going to be quite interesting. I will definitely be up for seeing the sequel to this off the strength of this movie. Let's just put it that way. So that's a pretty solid endorsement. So I'll cut it short because I feel like I don't know, maybe rambling. It's hard to do a review of a movie like this when it's non-spoilers because there's a lot more I want to say. But if I was to do so, it would be spoiling it. So sorry if this video's not been great, and sorry if this one here has been making a racket through this movie. She's panting and making all sorts of weird noises. But yeah, attention seeker. Anyway, I'll leave it there. So that's Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Have you seen it? What did you think? What do you think to my James Bond connections there? Did you notice any more? Did you think the examples that I'm making up are possibly me reading into it? Let me know. Right, so now, as soon as I stop filming, you go quiet. What is that about? Seriously. You, attention seeker, ruiner of BXR videos, pretending like nothing's happened.